Welcome everyone. I'm actually really excited to be talking about one of my favorite topics tonight, something that I'm really passionate about, which is positive behaviour support. So just from the outset, I know that Christelle and I have had a look, and we know that we've got a mix of educators and parents and carers tonight. So that's fantastic. It's really great to start seeing a mix of people on board and looking to see how we can best support our little people with Down syndrome and older people with Down syndrome as well. So some of the things that I'll be talking about tonight will possibly be more related either to a home or a school environment. Some of it may be new, some of it may not be new. So I'm just sort of accommodating both audiences with that, and just we'll see how we go. If you have any questions, just jump in on the chat and I'll just ask Crystal to cut me off and ask the questions, because once I start talking, I kind of am a bit of a freight train. So I just kind of keep on going. There's a lot to get through, but hopefully not too heavy going. And I'm really hoping that everybody can come away with some practical strategies to try either at home or at school or wherever you find yourself. So a little bit of an overview of what we will be doing. I realized I've got it on that one. It should be on that one. Sorry, everyone. Alrighty. So a little bit of an overview. So we'll do a snapshot into brain theory. Now, I get really excited about brain theory, but I promise it's just a very brief overview and very specific to our loved ones with Down syndrome. Looking at some common behaviours, and I should say a little bit of a disclaimer with that. When I talk about behaviours or supports or strategies, not everything that I say will be relevant to every single child, because we know that every child is very different. But hopefully there might be something in there that you can grab onto. But some common big behaviours that we hear about in schools. A crash course on positive behaviour support, some challenges to that, and hopefully some solutions to that, some strategies and some practical tips and some ideas along the way. So just before we start with that, I thought I would give you, and if you've been on one of my workshops before, you would have seen this. I do have permission from my beautiful families to use these photos, but this is a little bit about my why. So I started working with students with Down syndrome, as Crystal said, oh gosh, many years ago now. And when I first started working with students with Down syndrome, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. There was lots and lots to learn, and I found it quite challenging at first. And that's kind of a part of the reason why for this workshop, because I entered my school environment with a lot of qualifications and a lot of education and a lot of experience working in learning support. But when it came to working with students with Down syndrome, the needs of those students were so specific and so varied that I found that I really needed to seek more information, and the information that I was looking for wasn't necessarily there. So we developed a lot of systems and we developed a lot of programs along the way. And then I started to tap into some great resources, which are out there if you know where to look. But I found in that time working with students with Down syndrome, it was the most rewarding, truly the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my career, truly. And tied in with that is working with children who have behavioural needs, not necessarily children with Down syndrome with behavioural needs, but other children with behavioural needs. So my goal with Down syndrome New South Wales is really to make that journey easier for other people who might have questions in a similar way. So I believe that children with Down syndrome have superpowers, and this is one of my beautiful boys showing his superpowers, and he taught me to have superpowers too. So we're being superheroes there together. And the things that he taught me, that little boy taught me, I think he taught me far more than I ever taught him. So I was very lucky to go on that journey and to have been on this journey along the way. So I gave you the hard stuff first because it's late at night, switching hour. I know you've probably been sorting out the kids and everything. So we'll get into the brain theory first, and I promise you it is not too heavy going. It's just really a couple of things that are particularly relevant to students with Down syndrome. So the biggest, and I know parents and carers, you know this stuff already, but it is useful to go over. But the biggest difference in the brain of an individual with Down syndrome, there's other differences too, but the ones that we're talking about in terms of behaviour are the hippocampus and the temporal lobe. And the hippocampus is actually found within the temporal lobe. So if we have a quick look at those two areas of the brain and what they're responsible for, I think you will see kind of where we're coming from in our meeting tonight. So the hippocampus is a tiny little part of our brain, looks like a little bit like a seahorse, and it's really important in memory, and it's really important in learning. And it's really important for forming and consolidating new memories, as well as things like spatial navigation and finding your way in the world and things like that. So it's kind of like a memory index. So we store a lot of our long-term information in there, and we can organize and sort it when we need it. So when we're in a certain environment, say, for example, we might find ourselves in a shopping center, and we're on holidays, we've never been in that shopping center before. We can kind of go back into that index and we can say to ourselves, well, I've been in a shopping center before. I know generally, I can find a car park, I can get in to find Woolies or whatever I need to do, so that we can access it later. Now, really, really important for students with additional needs. It's also huge for things like emotional regulation. So emotional regulation and working together with memory and learning. And then we've got the temporal lobe, and that's over here on the sides of our head. So thinking about that, it's about processing what we hear. So auditory information. So students with Down syndrome, and you're going to hear this a lot, auditory information is really, really tricky. So just hearing information instead of seeing information is really tricky, and interpreting certain things in the environment and what they are. One of the very first things that I do when I start working with students with Down syndrome is I get them to differentiate sounds. So we go and listen for sounds in the environment so that we can start to tune into a siren, and we can start to tune into the school bell and things like that and differentiate those different sounds. It's also really important, just like the hippocampus is, with memory formation and retrieval. So the big pattern between those two areas of the brain, which do work in conjunction with each other, is forming memories and retrieving those memories when we need to get them. And then another huge implication there is language comprehension. So understanding language, what we're hearing, but also understanding spoken words and written words. And that's a snapshot of why visual learning is so much stronger than written learning or just auditory learning. So just hearing what we're learning. So this is a bit of a rhetorical, that's teach word, bit of a rhetorical question there. We don't necessarily need to answer it. But just thinking to yourself about those two things, those two areas of the brain, and what they're responsible for. So memory formation leading to visual learning and difficulty with auditory learning and regulating emotions. So the question we naturally ask ourselves is, what might the challenges be for a child with Down syndrome to learn new and expected behaviour at home and at school? So you would probably have a couple of ideas. Okay, now common behaviours, and I will say that disclaimer again, common behaviours is not everybody. So not everybody shows this behaviour. Some of this behaviour I've seen with every child that I work with Down syndrome, others, some, and not others. So I'm starting with a very intentional one, my personal favourite, which is the stop and flop. So the stop and flop is exactly what it sounds like. Some people say it's the stop and drop. So this is the most reported. Now, all of this is based on research, and I'm happy to hook anybody up with any research if you want to learn more about it. But it's the most reported behaviour both in homes and at school. So there's varying degrees of it. So sometimes it's over with pretty quickly, and then other times it lasts longer. Usually seen in younger children rather than older children, and it happens a lot at transition times. So it happens when a child is asked to stop doing an activity that they enjoy and to move on to an activity they don't enjoy. One thing I find really, really interesting, and research says the exact same thing, I've certainly seen this in my practice, is that it often happens even when the child is transitioning to an activity they enjoy. So say, for example, at school, a child might really, really love dance time or drama time, and we're transitioning to that time. And we might say, we're going to go and do dancing and you love dance time, and the child does the stop and flop. So it's not necessarily, there's a reason for it that we ourselves might be able to understand, but there will be a reason for the child. So the child just may become floppy. So I sort of found that floppy arms, floppy legs, kind of straight down to the ground, and may or may not verbalize. So what that turns into frequently when the child is older is it turns into task refusal. So task refusal is just flat out refusing to do a certain task. And it moves on from the stop and flop, usually because the child has developed some language along the way. So they're able to verbalize in some way why they don't want to, or not, maybe not why, but just that they're not going to. So basically it goes from the stop and flop to the no, I'm not going to do that. I don't like it. I'm not going to. The end result is the same, basically, is that the task or the behavior is not going to happen. So bolting, I love this clinical term for bolting. It's called, the clinical term is elopement, which is very romantic, but the behavior is not. It basically means running off. And there's different reasons for children with Down syndrome as to why they might be running off. The two simplest ones is to get to something that they like or to run away from something that they don't like. That's true for all children. So it's either to get to something or away from something. This one is identified as the most difficult behaviour by both parents and carers and professionals, and this is because it's really scary. It's really, really scary behaviour. So it's very risky behaviour. At schools, it unfortunately often turns into an issue because a lot of schools are fenced and there's nowhere for the child to go. So when the child's in that school environment, they're very safe, they're very contained, so they can run and they're not going to hurt themselves. But if you take them on an excursion or you take them off site, it becomes a really real risk. And obviously for parents and carers who are out in the world every day, it's a very, very scary sort of behaviour. Unlike the other behaviours, we can't ignore it. So we can't ignore bolting. We have to do something about it so that the child is safe. So the child may be upset, but then also, as we know too, they may think that it's a game. So it can often turn into a game. It can be fun and kind of rewarding. So hands-on and hitting. This one I haven't seen as commonly as those first three. So that stop and flop and that task refusal and the bolting, and then I've sort of put it in the order of what I've seen. So hands-on and hitting is particularly common in all individuals with limited expressive language, so that limited ability to communicate. It's the most frequent cause of referral to behaviour specialists by schools of any child, any student, any diagnosis or lack of diagnosis. It's the most frequent cause of referrals to behaviour specialists, and that's because it's the most anxiety inducing, and it's also the biggest, and it's I suppose also dangerous. It's a dangerous sort of behaviour as well. A really, really, really big one, if for our families who may not have children in school just yet, it can often happen. In my experience, 100% of the time does happen more at school than at home. So a child who has never ever shown hands-on behaviour at home may show this behaviour at school. There is a very, very clear reason why that happens at school, and we will go into that later. It may be, in my experience, it's very often low level, so it's not particularly aggressive. So it's things like hitting, kicking, pulling, pushing, or slapping. It may be low level, but it can also be quite frequent and can become more frequent if the child gets what they want. So think of a child who wants a toy that another child has and just snatches it out of their hand, and the other child sort of goes, oh, well, I'm just going to give you what you want. That behaviour will happen more and more frequently because it's kind of been affirmed. All right, stimming is a common behaviour, but not a problem behaviour by definition. So it's not good or bad, it's not positive or negative. So stimming is just a behaviour that feels good to the individual. It can take many forms. So flicking the hands, flapping the hands, squeezing an object, bouncing an object, or just bouncing the body, clicking the tongue, clicking the fingers. There's all sorts of variations with that. The only problem is with stimming is if it interferes with the child or the adult's ability to interact with others or to learn new skills, or is damaging. So grinding teeth is a really, really common one. And obviously that's dentally not great for, I don't know if dentally is a word, rhymes with mentally, makes sense in my head. Not a great thing, basically, because it's going to hurt their teeth. Another example of that in terms of ability to interact, a student I worked with once, his stimming behaviour was humming, and that other kids didn't mind so much when he was quite young, but that's quite disruptive as the child gets older. So children use stimming as a way to relieve stress or anxiety, or simply just relax, or it could just be something that feels nice, something that's pleasant. Another common behaviour that we seem to see in terms of stimming is having hands down the pants, which obviously in a school environment or in a public environment is kind of less than ideal socially. So behaviour like that feels good, but is only a problem if it starts to get in the way of life, basically. I love this photo. So this was just a stock photo that I found, and I thought, look at the look on the face of the boy with the hat. I think I've seen lots of this kind of face in my lifetime. So lack of boundaries, and it comes with that big love that we love so much about our loved ones with Down syndrome. So that big love and want to show affection and how much we love someone. Desire to show it in a physical way because that's the easiest way, hugging, kissing. In schools, it's often that's how I've shown affection to mum and dad and brothers and sisters all the way up to school. And then all of a sudden we get to school and that's called hands-on, and it's not acceptable. So some schools have a really, really strict hands-on policy where it's no hands-on ever. And then other schools are a bit more relaxed about hands-on. It's more about personal space and boundaries and things like that. Now, we do very briefly touch on teenagers and that lack of boundaries later on, but it just can sometimes become an issue of consent. So, I love you so much and I just think you're so great, so I'm going to give you a kiss, but to a 13-year-old girl, less than desirable in a school setting. It's also a big risk regarding a lack of awareness of stranger danger. All right, we're almost there with this. So insistence on sameness and routine. So an insistence on things being the same all the time. Kids love routines. All children, in my experience, love routines, knowing what's coming next. They like being able to predict what's going to happen. The world is a very unpredictable place. So it's a way for all of us to know that we are safe, that everything's going to be okay, and that the world is reliable. But it results in very high levels of agitation when changes are made or things are not the same. So at home, mum makes spaghetti bolognese the same way every single time, and I really like it. And then I go to Auntie Betty's house and she makes her spaghetti bolognese in a different way. That's not spaghetti bolognese because it's not the same as the way that mum makes it. Changing the rules of a game, things like that. For children who really like routine games and predictable games, and then somebody comes along and says, well, we're going to play it this way today, that's quite anxiety inducing. And that ties in with transitions. Biggest problem with it is that the world is not always a reliable and predictable place. So changes happen all the time. All right, very quickly, other reported behaviours. These are just the ones that I've encountered. There are a million of them in all different shades of colour. So might be impulse control, taking off clothes, hiding, snatching things off other people, sleep refusal, food refusal, or not necessary, or even overeating sometimes. There's as varied as the children in the world are, there are other ones. So, okay, a little bit of a crash course into behaviour, positive behaviour support. I apologise to all the teachers because I know that you've been learning this for a long time, so I won't go into it too much, but basically all in the name. So it started to emerge a few decades ago, and it's just an alternative to traditional or punitive, meaning punishment, forms of dealing with, for want of a better term, behaviour. So thinking about things like corporal punishment or using the cane, things like that. So it's grounded in the belief that there's a reason for all behaviour, positive behaviour, negative behaviour in all of us. So there's a reason why we're behaving in the way we are. So the theory of positive behaviour support, or PBS, in a school that's called PBS, often called PBS for L, so positive behaviour support for learning. In homes everywhere else, it's just called PBS. So it encourages the idea of creating, encouraging and supporting desirable behaviour to replace undesirable behaviour. So that's what we're all here for tonight. So that's what we're all working towards. Those words, desirable and undesirable, I've chosen very, very intentionally. And I don't use the words when I work with students and work in schools. I don't use the words good behavior and bad behavior. Certainly try to avoid the word naughty if I can, because just there's a bit of an association with that, with the person being bad. So when we're talking in this environment, I wouldn't use those words to you, for example. Might have a different language with students, but I talk about with parents, carers, teachers, families. I say desirable behavior and undesirable behavior, or acceptable behavior and unacceptable behavior. That's because it's just not labeling the behavior as bad, because there's a reason for it. It's just not the behavior that we want to see. So it also, that's part one. Part two is it aims to understand the function or the reason why children are behaving the way they are or making the choices that they are. So if we understand why, we can begin to understand the needs of the child. And this is the big goal. The big goal in PBS is to understand or prevent that undesirable behavior before it occurs, not after it occurs. Okay, so thinking about an example there about why a child with Down syndrome might show behavior which is generally considered undesirable. So a child who's showing repeated instances of stopping and flopping might be doing this, as we've talked about, when they're asked to stop doing something that they like doing, like playing on an iPad, to start doing something that they don't like doing, like brushing their teeth. So that's an example in a smaller child. An older child might demonstrate a lack of boundaries with friends because they've seen the boys and girls in high school developing relationships. So they've seen other teenagers start to partner up and show affectionate behavior. They're kissing or they're cuddling, and all of a sudden it's great. Okay, well, that's what we're doing. So we're back to showing that's, how we show interest in someone or affection with someone, or kind of a romantic interest with someone. All right, look at that. Straight away, you all went, yeah, that's right. So reinforcement in adults. So behavioral psychology, it tells us that even us as adults, our behavior is constantly reinforced all the time. So when we receive something that we like after we behave in a certain way, we're going to repeat that behavior. So an example at work is if you get a raise or a bonus or a promotion for working really hard at your job, and your boss has said to you, well, you get that bonus because you met this sales target. Well, we're far more likely, who wouldn't want that bonus? We're far more likely to do that again and the next year and again and again and again. We're likely to maintain that level of working hard because we're getting a reward for it. The same's true for children. Now, this is quite an interesting little statistic. So we're taught at university, educators are taught to reinforce positive behaviour 10 times for every redirection or criticism of negative behaviour. So that's really, really interesting. And it's something where it is really hard even for people that are taught to do it as often as we are. So that's in an ideal world. I'm not talking ideal world here, but for every time we redirect a child, we should be giving them positive affirmations 10 times as much as that. So systems are put in place for schools to do that, but systems aren't put in place for home to do that. So we have to do that in educational settings, but that, out in the big wide world, it doesn't always look like that. Would be nice if it did, but it doesn't always. So the aim of that is to highlight to children the behaviour we want or we expect to see from them, rather than constantly giving attention to negative behaviours, which we'll get into a little bit further down the track. With those 10 positive reinforcements, the ideal scenario is that those reinforcements are really specific. So we're not just saying good boy, we're not just saying good girl, we're naming the behavior that we're seeing really, really specifically. So say, for example, we're working on a goal of packing our bag in the morning. Great job. You put your drink bottle in your bag. I like how you remembered to get your lunchbox and put it in your bag. So we're naming the behavior that we like to see, rather than keeping it kind of general. All right. So in short, reinforce the good stuff. Don't reinforce the bad stuff, which sounds so easy. It sounds so easy, right? Except it's not. It's absolutely not. So there are some challenges, and there are some really specific challenges for our loved ones with Down syndrome. So let's have a look at some of those challenges specifically as it relates to our children. All right, number one, always, needs of the child. So in my moments where I'm feeling very frustrated or very tired, or I've just had enough, I try to always remember the needs of the child are always number one. All children, every child has the right to be heard and to be able to show us what they need. Now, for children with additional needs, it's really challenging for them to convey what they need. So they might be showing that need in an inappropriate way, but we still really have to try to understand what it is. We really have to work to try to understand what's causing that behaviour to happen. So number two, we know, and can I just say back on that point, needs of the child, yes, it's really hard when we're really frustrated. So keeping that in mind, and none of us, me first, are absolute saints who keep their cool all the time. So we're going to get frustrated when that behaviour is really annoying. It's not always about the needs of the child, it's about the needs of the family. So it's about what everybody needs and looking after each other in that moment. That might be where a good partner kind of steps in and goes, oh, I can hear it's getting to this point, I'm going to step in with the needs of the children. So language barriers, we know. There's difficulty with expressive language and communication. However, that receptive language as well, and that difficulty with auditory learning and only hearing things can make it really tricky, because we can't always explain why a certain behaviour is desirable or acceptable or not. So when we're talking to a very small child about not sticking something into a PowerPoint, it's very difficult to convey to that child why that's an unacceptable behaviour, or running off and running onto the road is an unacceptable behaviour, because in that moment, that moment of crisis, we don't have the resources that we need to communicate that effectively all the time. So that can be tricky. Okay, this one's a good one. So attention. So individuals with Down syndrome are generally very social people. Now, I say generally, in my experience, 100% of the time, they are very, very social people with incredible capacity to connect emotionally with other people. So with that, especially with young people, it's a big desire for attention. All children love attention, or most children love attention, but especially small children with Down syndrome really love attention. Any kind of attention, doesn't matter what kind of attention it is. Sometimes negative behaviour can be unintentionally reinforced. So we talked about that idea of running off being a game, being fun. Another example, and there's some quite interesting research on this, is that for individuals with Down syndrome, sometimes what they're looking for, or sometimes what they see, is our physical action. And the bigger our action is, the more the receptors in their brains are responding to what we're doing. So if we are having any kind of big reaction, and you can probably imagine I'm someone who has them, so big hands and the big face and the big voice, that's triggering off sometimes some of those pleasure centers in the brain where I'm getting any kind of attention, that's good. Whereas what we really, we're kind of reinforcing that behaviour with our big reaction to that behaviour. So the alternative to that is have the big reaction to the desirable behaviour, have very little reaction to the undesirable behaviour. And that can be quite hard, because you want to have that big reaction. But we keep our voice low, we keep it moderated, we ignore, where we can ignore the behaviour, and we pay all the attention and all the wonderful, wonderful praise for the behaviour that we do want to see. All right. Showing alternative behaviour. Okay, so great, you take away the undesirable behaviour. That's fantastic. So all of a sudden your child isn't stopping and flopping anymore. But how are they going to communicate alternative behaviour, an alternative choice? So if you take away the bad behaviour I just said it then, the undesirable behaviour, what are you going to replace it with instead? So an example is if a child shows love and affection with inappropriate physical contact, how can we teach them an appropriate way to show affection? Because we would hate to lose that. We would hate to lose that love and that affection and that empathy, but we just need to learn to show it in an alternative, appropriate way. And that's tricky because how we do that with mum and dad might be very different to how we do that with our teacher at school. All right. So those are the challenges over. So solutions, happy days, solutions. So all of that stuff is gone. We're done. We've talked about that. So let's talk about some solutions. So proactive versus reactive. All of us can be reactive. I was very reactive on the weekend. I won't tell you why, but we are reactive. Our first instinct when we're faced with behavior that we don't expect or we really don't like is to think, how am I going to stop this behavior, especially when it is driving me crazy? So in that moment where everyone's really, really heightened, all we want to do is stop that behavior in that moment. And we're worked up. So we're worked up, we're agitated, we're reacting to the behavior. So the really big problem with reacting to undesirable behavior is that we're doing it after the event. So it's already happened. It's in the rearview mirror. We're also far more likely to react with a punishment mindset. So we're going to come down like a ton of bricks because we're really annoyed with that behavior. The difficulty for our loved ones with Down syndrome is to connect that reaction, that punishment, to that behavior. That is a massive, massive, massive challenge, and something that it's really, really difficult to make that connection. So it's especially true if that reaction or that punishment, now I'm specifically talking about students with Down syndrome, children with Down syndrome here, if it happens well after the event, it may as well never happen at all. So the further away the punishment or the reaction is to the undesirable behavior, the less likely it is to have any kind of impact. It's basically not going to give you the result that you want. All right, so we're going to look at a couple of specific examples. So we're going to look at one from home and one from school. All right, so keeping all that in mind. So at school, Jane's been taking the food out of other children's lunch boxes. Now, this is a specific example. This actually happened. So this is a real scenario, but the child's name is not Jane. Poor Jane, whoever she is, she gets blamed for everything. It's always the name we choose. Children's lunch boxes and eating it in the morning. This is only discovered at lunchtime when the other children want to eat their lunch. The teacher makes Jane miss out on playtime because she ate the other students' food. Okay. Is Jane likely to connect this punishment to her behavior? So just show me with your heads, nod or no. So she's not very likely. She's not very likely to connect that punishment to her behavior. The reason why is because she's eating the food in the morning. So she's eating that food first thing in the morning when she gets to school, and then the teacher's discovering it 2 hours later at recess time and saying, well, you shouldn't have eaten that food. That behaviour's gone. It's done. Jane's done 50 million things since she ate the food in the lunch boxes. The other is, and teachers, you may be able to relate to this one. For Jane, going to the office is not a punishment. So Jane probably loves going to the office at playtime because that's where her friends are, and she probably gets a lot of attention from the office ladies, and somebody probably has a big cranky talk with her, or, kids come in and kids come out. There's a lot happening in that space. So that's not really going to mean much to her. So we will talk about it later on, but why might she be eating the food? So why might she be eating that food in the first place? And you might have some ideas as to why she might be doing that. Okay, this was a home example. Again, this is a real example. Luke is not the name of the child, different child. All right, at bedtime, Luke has a new routine. He reads 2 bedtime stories with Dad, and then he gets a goodnight kiss, and then it's lights out time and he's left to go to sleep on his own. Every night, Luke leaves his bed to go into his sister's room. His sister loves Luke very, very much, and she's very happy for Luke to come in with her, because it also means that she's not by herself. So Luke falls asleep with his sister. However, the next day she's tired and late for school because she hasn't slept well. When Mum and Dad find out about it the next morning, they're cross with him and he has to go to bed early the next day. So is Luke likely to connect that punishment to his behaviour? Nods and shakes. No, he's not likely to. That one's even more extreme. So it's kind of 24 hours past the events happened. Also, in my experience, I found going to bed early is a punishment for the parent because the child is not sleepy. So they're not going to go to sleep for a long time. All right. So we might have some ideas why Luke might be visiting his sister at bedtime. When we take that reactive way of thinking out of our heads, so we're not in that heat of the moment anymore, we can see why Luke and Jane are doing the things that they're doing. So Jane, in all likelihood, was probably just hungry. She wanted food. She might have wanted the food specifically that was in someone's lunchbox. She might need a bigger breakfast. She might need to have a mid-morning snack at school. We don't know. We don't know, but we need to find out. So we need to find out what it is. The solution could be as simple as that. We can see that Luke's new routine is tricky for him to adjust to. He doesn't like going to bed on his own. He doesn't like going to sleep on his own. So that's why he's going in with his sister. That's why he's going into the room with her. So an alternative to being reactive is being proactive. So proactive or positive behaviour supports are so effective that, and I don't know whether the teachers in the space know this, but special education laws state that they must be used first when dealing with challenging behaviour. That is how effective they are in helping students with additional needs. So we have to use proactive positive behaviour support before we can try any kind of punishment or consequence approach. So it just means putting structures in place to prevent that negative behaviour and to encourage good behaviour before any of it occurs. Now, this was one of my lecturers' sayings at university, and I really love this saying. It stayed with me ever since. Just means we focus on the positives and the future rather than the negatives and the past. So I really like that, and I think it's kind of what we all want to do, right? We all want to focus on the positives and focus on the future. All right, so I'm about to go into some strategies and some tips. Before I do that, do I have any questions? I think I see something in the chat. Is proactive behaviour support mentioned in legislation in New South Wales? It is. So the specific reference would be helpful to know. It's mentioned specifically in terms of children with additional needs. So what this presentation will turn into, Gemma, is I've actually been working in conjunction at creating a resource to go with it. So I don't know whether you received the emails from the organisation, but they're starting to filter through now. So we're creating a lot more resources to support parents, carers, and particularly parents and carers and educators at the moment. So this will be turned into a resource for that. But there is one that's come out already called Legal Rights and Inclusive Education. So if you hang around, I can tell you where to find that one. But yes, it is specifically mentioned. All right. So some strategies for positive behaviour support for both home and school. All right. Okay, this is my number one. This is my number one strategy. So the students that I worked with, relationships are everything for our loved ones with Down syndrome. So most of us probably know a little bit about attachment theory. So children with a strong attachment to their caregivers are likely to live happy, healthy, safe, secure lives. And there's all sorts of research that goes into what a insecure attachment can look like later in life. Number one, caregivers are parents and carers. Number one, always. But not only parents and carers, but also extended families, nanas and pops and aunties and uncles and all those people too, classroom teachers, assistants, professionals and specialists. So relationships are everything. So some interesting research about relationships. So it can take longer for children with intellectual disabilities to build relationships with new people. And that's very true in my experience too. Once the attachment's formed, it's very strong. Now, I've also found the flip side of the attachment. If there's a negative attachment, or a child really doesn't like someone, so they just don't have a good feeling about someone, it's very hard to cross that bridge and create a positive attachment. Children with Down syndrome have a clear preference to spend time with people to whom they have a strong attachment. So that's fairly logical. They will also show, I like this statistic, a clear reduction in challenging behaviour for caregivers with whom they have a strong attachment. So the simplest example of that might be a parent versus a babysitter, or it might be the classroom teacher versus a substitute teacher. So the child will generally behave better for someone that they know and love and have a strong attachment to. Some evidence, and this is kind of growing, there's growing evidence in this area, but children with an intellectual disability have a smaller scope for networks of close relationships. They prefer a smaller group of strong relationships over a larger group of casual relationships. A parent once said to me that she had a working theory that her son had about 5 to 10 people who he had that really, really close relationship with. And she said, and think about it, by the time he started school, he's got mum, he's got dad, he's got nan, he's got pop, he's got his speechy, he's got his OT, he's got his sister. Well, that's 7 people. That leaves room for 3 more people at school, maybe, who he can form that attachment with. And there's lots of people in a school environment. So building that relationship, in my experience, and another thing a different parent said to me is that they had a working theory that it took about 6 to 12 months to build that relationship. And that is very true in my experience, about that period of time, 6 to 12 months. And in the teaching world, child moves on in 12 months. So they've just formed that attachment, and they've got to go and form it with someone else, which sort of raises questions about people like teachers' aides, you know, perhaps moving along with that person. And in building that relationship, the ratio of fun to learning, you know, it's got to be a lot of fun with a little bit of learning, and then you can kind of work your way up from there. So this is an interesting one. So I actually found this in the researching that I've been doing recently into the area of behaviour theory, but particularly children with intellectual disability, it's shown that the relationship between caregivers is almost just as important as the relationship between the caregivers and the child. So that means the connection between parents and teachers, all the people, if we're all working together for the best needs of that child's going to do really well. So if we're all working together as a community, I say it takes a village. So the implication is that, as I've said, children with Down syndrome will often demonstrate less desirable behaviour for people they don't know. So caregivers who know the child well will be able to read that child's emotions and needs. So they will see when a child is becoming agitated or anxious. They'll be able to preempt those challenging situations before they arise, which is perfect. So a child who doesn't like going to the dentist is an example, because last time they screamed the house down, last time they had to go to the dentist. In an environment like a school, especially a secondary school, and this is a huge, huge area for lots of our families, our students are around lots and lots and lots of caregivers. So they're around multiple people in the day. Who are they supposed to attach to? So who is their go-to person? A lot of evidence suggests one or two key caregivers to give primary responsibility. So that person needs to have frequent and meaningful contact with the child. So not somebody who is outside of the situation and only seeing the child once a week or once a fortnight. It's got to be someone having frequent, preferably daily contact with the child. All right, love visuals. Visuals are key. So almost every study, I say almost every study because I haven't read every single study. Everyone that I've read says children with Down syndrome are far stronger visual learners than verbal learners. Visuals are the key to success both at home and in the classroom. Typically, developing adults rely heavily on spoken language. I'm relying on it now. So when we're upset or frustrated, we rely on spoken language more. So when we're upset, we use more words, and the words are faster. So we're using them a lot more quickly. Far less likely to be processed by the child. So not only does a visual schedule, we love visual schedules, allow individuals with Down syndrome the opportunity to understand what's being asked of them, it leads to the creation of a routine, which is a wonderful thing. So we know what's coming, what's coming up next. We are putting out some resources on some visuals and some editable visual resources, which we love. So less is more when it comes to visuals, not too many. All right, set up your environment. So I talk so much about routines, don't I? Because I just, know that children love them. So every day is a challenge because every day something is going to throw routine out of place. Consistency is great. It's really, really great when we can. So when we can try to kind of maintain even the consistency of what we say and the words that we use. So that's why we might say something like hands off, because it's simple, it's 2 words, and we can just say it again and again and again. So repeating those same keywords. Some research. The environment means just basically the space. So when we talk about the environment, we're just talking about the space where a child spends their time. For children with additional needs, navigating an environment where things are constantly changing is similar in terms of brain patterns and anxiety and things like that. It's very similar actually to an adult who spends time in a foreign country where no one communicates or behaves in an expected way. So a lot of us have been in that environment. But imagine being in that environment without a passport and without money and without all of the things that, and without having done any research. You just transplanted into that environment. Pretty scary place. So the more consistent we can try to make things, we can't make things consistent all the time, the more academic and social gains we'll see in the child. All right. So a tip that we'll go into further is creating a reward system that works. Some people don't like the word rewards, just substitute it with whatever word you like. So it's sometimes called a token economy. And in schools, that's taken literally. So it's literally a token. So the all children in most of our schools these days are given physical tokens for making good choices, which can be cashed in for a reward. Children are often encouraged to work together because that's great social skills, to work together to achieve them. For children with an intellectual disability, it's a tangible way, so like a physical way to connect desirable behaviour with something that's great and fun. So in the last school that I worked at, I think I mentioned this before in a previous workshop, but we had a class cup. And we had a girl that when she won the class cup, it was like she won the Academy Awards. So she would come, she would show everybody, and her behaviour really took a turn because of the class cup, because she really loved the class cup and really wanted to earn that class cup. But it can be whatever you want it to be. So some caregivers don't like the idea of tokens or rewards because it feels like bribery. And the question with that is, shouldn't our children or students behave appropriately because it's what they are supposed to do and it's the right thing to do? For children with additional needs, the answer is quite simply no. And there's some reasons why. For some children, yes, that might be the case and that's great. But for most of our children, the answer is no. So the difference is the brain. For a child with an intellectual disability, things like task mastery, learning, retaining new skills are more difficult than they are for neurotypical children. We need to say and show what good behaviour is. We can't just assume that our little ones will know what those things are. We need to acknowledge it visually and physically when it occurs. So more than a pat on the back. So a pat on the back is lovely, but we need to be more specific than that. So with the rewards or with the token economies, it can be really simple. I'm talking home and I'm talking school and I'm talking everywhere here. So it can be a smiley face on a post-it note. It can be anything, a sticker. It can be anything that you like. The important thing is that it's the same. So whatever it is, it should be the same each time. And they force us, for want of a better word, they force us to look for the positive. So thinking of that 10 to 1, if we know we're going to be handing them out, then we're going to be looking for those great behaviours and those positive things. When a new behaviour or a rule is being taught, focus on one thing that you really, really want. And normally we'd say choose the biggest one, choose the one that really needs. So if it's running away, then choose that one. and lots of tokens when we see the right behavior. So so when naming the language, we're using the same language all the time. So it might be bottoms on the chair, it can be whatever you like, hands in your lap, whatever. Same language, and then we're giving out the tokens. So not overloading with expectations. As I've said, maybe choose one, maybe choose two areas you'd like to focus on. A good example, a lot of families say morning routine is tricky. At school, we hear transition time is tricky. So it might be that. Keep that reward, give that token in the near future. So it's the flip side to the punishment for the poor behavior. If it comes too far after the event, it's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. So if you can, in that moment, acknowledge that good behavior, then let the child set the reward. So families have got great. I've seen much more creative things than I can ever come up with at home. So, rocket ships to the moon or ladder to the stars, and the tokens go up on there. And then when the child reaches the moon, or they reach the stars, or they reach, if they're really into dinosaurs, they reach the dinosaur. What would your child like to see as the reward for that, if you can negotiate it? So a little reward is just going out and going to the park with a friend, going and kicking a ball with a friend, playing a game with mum or dad, or just doing some painting or something like that. It can be even bigger, whatever you like, but it's nice to let the child set the reward. Many experts say a reward shouldn't be food time or screen time, and I say life is hard enough, so you do you. I don't dictate anything like that. I say you do what works for you and your family. So certainly not here to judge in that department. All right, before we go into tips, which is the last thing we're talking about, sounds like, Gemma, I might need to talk to you and see what's happening with that school. So Jane's got a really great point. So she said, we've been keeping the same teacher for 2-year stints and it's paid dividends, and we're lucky that the attachments have been positive. So that's really interesting. And I think that maybe what we're seeing is a little bit of traction with this idea of students staying with a teacher more than that 12-month period of time. Some schools are for it and some schools are against. I actually worked with, so the little superhero that you saw at the beginning of the slideshow, I taught him for 3 years, and I can tell you what I got out of him in the 3rd year was very different to what happened in the 1st year. And the little girl, I actually worked with her for more than that, so many years. And I was her school mum and she was my school daughter, but we had those gains only because we had that time together. So it's very interesting. I think there's a bit of room for the department to kind of think about what we're doing there for our students with intellectual disability. All right, so some tips. Okay, social stories. Now, everyone here is probably familiar with social stories to some degree. I'm just going to show you, because you probably know a lot about the theory of them, very visual. They're perfect. In fact, I love social stories. Now, I've included, this is a social story that I actually created for one of my students. I didn't want to show the students, so I've replaced it with clip art. It's always more desirable to show a photo of the child. So if you can show a child showing that behavior, then that's perfect. That's great. So I listened to all my teachers. Now you can see there that font is quite large. For the teachers and educators in the group, I really don't like New South Wales Foundation font for children with Down syndrome. And in fact, controversial, but I don't use it. And the reason why is because it's very spidery, and a lot of our students have got vision impairment as well, and it's not very helpful, that narrow spidery font. So I use a big Century Gothic, often in bold. Also, it matches much more of the font used in a lot of books as well. So very few words, 1 sentence, maybe 2. I listen to all my teachers. I like my classroom teacher. You would have a photo of the teacher. When my teacher is here, I know what to expect. Sometimes, though, I'm going to have a different teacher. So preempting, sometimes I'm going to have a different teacher. I worry when I hear that there will be a new person in my class, and it's okay. It's okay to worry. It's okay to be scared, and it's okay to be angry. Affirming that it's okay to feel that. What are we going to replace it with? It's okay to feel like that. Talking to another teacher that I do know and I do trust can help me. And that's often going to be a teacher's aide, SLSO, a grade partner, a stage partner, someone familiar in that space. So a teacher might need to speak to me on the playground. So that will be a teacher that I don't know. I need to listen to teachers on the playground so that I am safe. Oh, I've just dropped out and I haven't finished. Oh, I don't know why I've gone right to the end of that. Sorry, I'll just flip back through. But that was basically it. That's it for that social story. So some tips, these will all be, all these notes will be sent out to you. Limit the text. The purpose of the text will primarily be for an adult to read the book to a child, not that you're not expecting the child to read it to themselves. Make it a really lovely experience. I once almost cried when I saw a child who was past the point, teary, emotional, really, really, really upset, and the book was being read to them as a punishment. So they're not going to take anything in that moment. So it's never, ever, ever used after undesirable behavior or as a punishment. It's always used before and preempt. So before they go out on the playground or before we have to go to the dentist or before I start a new activity. All right. I've already talked about that. Keep it positive. Oh, the wording. So try not to make it a don't do this and don't do that. It should be a do this and do that. That's just kind of coming from the like a language theory that it's actually much easier for a child to understand a command than it is a negative, a don't do. So it's much easier to understand a do than a don't do. So rather than kind of listing a whole lot of things like that, it can sometimes be interpreted, it can sometimes backfire. So if it's, I do not touch other children, it can sometimes, what you hear is touch children, and then that's not really what you want. So it can backfire. And it's always okay. It's always okay to feel all those big feelings. We all feel big feelings, and that's okay. Okay, using real photographs, show something positive that might happen if you can. So after we go to the dentist, I can play at the park, and then read the book, go to the dentist, go to the park. One or two social stories is it, not a whole stack of them. I do have permission to use this photo, and is that not the cutest thing you've ever seen? So this is an example of a page that shows what we do want to see. So I can put my hand up to ask a question, take a photo of the child asking that question, and then it's there forever. All right, visuals. So a first and then chart. We love first and then charts. I'm sure, again, everybody's heard of a first and then chart. Simple way to set the expectations and what might come afterwards. I have used this first and then chart. I don't love visually, I don't love the red and the green. I just use white or off-white. Just the contrast visually is a bit uncomfortable, but I've done it there so you can see it, basically. This is a better one. So first and then doctor visit and then playground. So we're pairing something we don't like with something we do like. So there's I believe it's free. It used to be. I didn't check it today, so I can't confirm, but Boardmaker is a really great tool. It's got this is Boardmaker here, very simple graphics. It can be used in conjunction with other things. So say, for example, you make a chart at home about all the things that your day is going to hold. You can use those same visuals. Again, these are resources that we're hoping to come up with and send out, pop out on our website. So keep the visuals the same so that the child knows what's coming up. And laminate them. So just laminate them and use Velcro to attach it to the board, and manually adding them, asking the child to do it, it gives them ownership and it gives them a choice of a reward. So we're going to go to the dentist. What will we do after that? You tell me, and then they build the first and then. All right, transitions. Yikes. Okay, transitions. So transitions are always tricky. Here, just some quick tips. So give the child a heads up. So 5 minutes 2 minutes, 1 minute. The child is not, especially young children, are not really going to attach any meaning to that period of time. However, that repeated language is really useful. So just using the same language every time, the child will know to expect that this fun thing that I'm doing is going to come to an end. Really, now, there is no evidence to support this. It's just something that I found in my practice. It's really, really interesting, but I found often that having something physical, a child having something physical that they can take from one space into another space is often really, really useful. And I've had students where they don't even care what that thing is. It might be a ruler, or it might be a pencil, or it could be a toy, it could be whatever, but it's just a physical thing that shows in the child's mind moving from one space to another space. So it's like a mental kind of crossing of a bridge between this space and that space. So I would say pick what you want to take. So, when we're in this space, what do you want to take with you? The child picks up whatever they want to take with them, and then we go to the new space, and then they're wherever they need to be, and then I take that object back from them if they're willing to give it back up. They can hang on to it, I don't care. But just to show, moving from one space to the other. Oh, great tip. Distract, distract, distract. Make it a game. So I have gone on 1,000, bear hunts where I must have looked like a maniac walking from one space to another. We would go searching for things. So we would say, okay, we're going to look for a bee. We're going to look for a flower, distracting, talking, making it a game. And in schools, quite simply, it can be easier if you let a friend go with them. So even if that friend just helps them transition the more transition back, the more those transitions are positive, hopefully the easier they will become. One more visual: happy face, sad face. I like the happy face and sad face. You can tie these in with social stories. It's just nice because it links to what our faces actually do, when we're feeling happy and sad. And it can be the child themselves feeling happy or sad. So an example of using a happy face or a sad face is for hands-on behaviour at school. We can show the child that hands-on behaviour, this is good in a social story, makes other people feel sad. So when hands-on behaviour, can make people feel sad, you can use it with behaviour charts. Keep it positive, lots and lots and lots and lots of happy faces when we can. So identifying those happy faces. And quick last tips, I've already talked about attention for undesirable behaviour and how it can turn into a game. Bright, happy, enthusiastic reactions for desirable behaviour. Little to no reactions for undesirable behaviour. Speaking as little as possible. I know that's really hard in times of heightened emotions, but it's not going in. So you're just wasting kind of the words, and then teaching the replacement behaviour. So what can your child do instead?